Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much, Dave. My name is Mary Miro. I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform. Thank you all for being here today. Raise your hands if you came to last month's part 1. Awesome, great. I'm so glad that you guys came back for part 2 of this 2-part series. Really happy to have you. Dave, thank you so much again. Thank you to the Union League Club of Chicago for hosting and sponsoring our event today. We'll be live streaming and recording this discussion, so please visit our Facebook page where you will be able to stream it or tell your friends, and they can also, if they're not able to be here today, they can be with us during this conversation. So today we're so excited to delight in a conversation with the Democratic nominee for Cook County Assessor, Mr. Fritz Kaegi, and learn more about his vision for reforming the property tax system in Cook County. As part of our part 1 of this 2-part series, we met with the panelists crew who wrote the Tax Divide series, really looking at the history of the property tax system, the inequity that they unveiled in their research, and today we're going to be looking forward. So what is the future? And that is why we're so excited to have Fritz here with us today. Today we'll hear from Fritz first, and then we'll sort of begin our conversation. Then there'll also be an opportunity to have questions from the audience. So thank you all for preparing your questions in advance, and we'll have someone coming around with it. We'll actually have Dave come around with a microphone to hear your questions. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Democratic nominee for Cook County Assessor, Fritz Kaegi, to the stage. Thank you so much.
Hey everybody, good morning.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be here to support both groups in your mission. So thanks Mary and thanks Dave. I'm a big fan of ICPR and all of the things that you've been doing, that you present forums for, that you investigate. Thank you for that. I'm also a big fan of what you were mentioning, Dave, about the Union League Club and supporting unity in the United States and the history that you gave us. I'm the son of a historian, so know that I have a keen appreciation for the history you just gave us. And guys, this is great. It's pretty amazing that of all the places you could be on a beautiful summer morning, that you chose to be here with me to talk about real estate tax assessment. Thank you all for being such nerds. You're in good company. But you're not alone. If there's one thing I learned during the campaign, is that everybody I know seems to have their own story or anecdote or experience about interacting with the system. Everyone has an opinion about this office. Let's look back at the past year. We had a whole year's worth of huge, serialized, above-the-fold investigative exposés in the Tribune, shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize in local reporting, by the way. I don't know if Jason's here. We had some pretty bold and memorable newspaper endorsements, too. We had 6 sitting members of Congress. All Democrats endorse us over the chairman of the party, and 7 if you include incoming Congressman Chuy Garcia. Even The Economist magazine covered this race. I can't think of an instance where The Economist has ever written about an American county race. Can you? To people unfamiliar with Chicago politics, it seems insane that such a humble office can create such a stir. And it's a little alarming when this office, which is pretty technical, is so interesting. Well, if I do my job right, we do our job right, we're going to make this office less interesting. We hope to do that. Since March, my team and I have been hard at work on a plan that's focused on making this office ethical, transparent, and fair, so that the office can go about its duty of marking properties to their market values without favoritism, discrimination, or wild inaccuracy, so that it can do what other assessors' offices in the rest of the United States do: operate efficiently in the background so that people can go about their business. And before we get into our plans, let's just remember why this is so urgent. Currently, our assessment system creates tremendous economic inequity. Wide swaths of the county, largely on the south and west sides of Chicago, and in the western and south suburbs, are substantially and grossly overassessed. Everyone from the University of Chicago, to the Chicago Tribune, to the Lincoln Land Institute, to the Civic Consulting Alliance, they've all found this to be true. And there are real human consequences to this. Each year, hundreds of millions of dollars in wealth is taken from the south side alone, from the west side alone, from the west sides of the suburbs and the south end. This is money that should be kept in people's pockets to pay down debts and spend on their families. It's money that's not supporting local businesses. It's money that's not generating jobs in the neighborhood. This is displacing people from their homes and creating vacancies. Displacement and disinvestment are feeding off of each other. In total, what this does is lead to shrinking populations and boarded up storefronts in neighborhoods across the county. And in fact, we have regressivity in assessments throughout Cook County. The more modest your home in every single neighborhood, the higher the rate you pay. Think about that. The Civic Consulting Alliance study from last February showed that in Chicago, the owner of a $600,000 home would be paying a 24% lower effective tax rate than the owner of a $300,000 home. That is not supposed to be the way the system works under the law. And there is dramatic underassessment of downtown commercial properties. That means that when they get billions of dollars of favors, homeowners and small businesses make up the difference. They literally make up the difference when these favors are given to others. You may have seen the Crane's analysis of the 50 top commercial real estate transactions in Cook County in the last 5 years. Here's their conclusion. The prices of all 50 properties add up to $17 billion, while the assessor values them at only $7.8 billion. That is, they're underassessed by more than 50%. The difference, about $9 billion, equals the value of nearly 40,000 medium-priced homes in the Chicago area. Appalling error. All of this is a direct consequence of a corrupt system that benefits a small handful of people at the expense of millions of people around the county who desperately need fairness in government. Here at the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform, you don't need me to tell you what happens when government offices get corrupted for the political and economic benefit of a select few. Ethical issues, a lack of transparency, pay to play, nepotism, these are all hallmarks of machine politics. And we've seen this story before in Chicago. It goes back a long ways. And we've seen the consequences. The public pays a steep price, and in particular, black and brown communities. People lose faith in government and our civic institutions and indeed our democracy. They all suffer. The voters were disgusted with this, and in March 2018, they overwhelmingly voted for change. Change, in this case, is fairness, accuracy, and transparency. This is the platform we ran on during the campaign. This is the platform that voters overwhelmingly supported. This is the platform that makes sense to everyone who's ever tried to navigate this system and wondered why this office can't get it right the first time. Without forcing property owners to fork over their time and money to a small handful of insiders. We are in a fortuitous position to make this change. And it's not only because the voters are with us, it's also because better tools are out there. Better tools are out there. You see, I used to be a portfolio manager of the Acorn Fund. It's a $5 billion mutual fund based here in Chicago. And my job was about valuing assets and acting as a steward over people's savings. And we were constantly on the lookout for new investment ideas, and certain themes helped us to find them. My mentor, Ralph Wanger, taught us about a big theme which he called downstream from technology. This goes that in times of technological change, we should look to invest in companies that leverage technology. That instead of trying to find the best, most cutting-edge tech company out there, look for companies that simply benefit from cheaper and more pervasive computing power. Software, media, data companies are some of these. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the assessor's office is downstream from technology in myriad ways. Why? Real estate assessment is an exercise in taking lots of data about property characteristics and transactions, and then crunching that data to estimate as accurately as possible the market values of these properties. That's what it does. And the state of the world today is that there are ever proliferating means of gathering data and of data sources. Geographic information systems, 3D modeling, mortgage data, other third-party sources, data that used to be trapped at the Board of Review or Recorder of Deeds or other government bodies, or in paper documents like building permits. These can be captured and stored at ever lower costs to get to that goal of getting better data and more accurately measuring what the value they have in the market is today. And this was unimaginable even 10 years ago. The assessor's office is ideally and uniquely positioned to leverage these investments and these advancements in technology. There are really big global themes that you'll hear about in business and civic circles here in Chicago. Big data, smart cities. These same technological forces that are allowing private companies to use data to better understand their customers and markets, well, and that are allowing cities to open up formerly closed and dumb assets to outside application developers, they have allowed assessors' offices around our country to take more data and more accurately estimate property values. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can look to the examples set by offices around the country and bring best practices here to Cook County. In King County and Washington State, the assessor's website allows for incredibly dynamic data visualization. You can draw a square on a map and see what's going on with rents and vacancy rates and prices, and there's no reason why we can't do that here. The reform assessor in Los Angeles, Jeff Krang, has made enormous strides to modernize an office that was also plagued by some of the same ethical problems as Cook County's. And LA publishes a really great annual report reviewing real estate trends and the office's own performance. We hope to emulate that. In New York, commercial property owners all submit a form that lays out their rental income, operating expenses, and the federal Schedule E tax information. And the New York Department of Finance takes that information and is able to turn around assessments much faster, much more accurately and fairly. They publish, once they know your operating income for your property, they publish the multipliers that determine the market price on that rental income, and you're off to the races. You don't need a lawyer, an appraiser, you don't need to haggle for years over inaccurate assessments. It helps you to raise capital. It makes for much more certainty. You know, we've been in conversation with some of these offices already, and me and my team, my team and I will be at the National Assessing Conference in Minnesota in this September, which is coming up in 1 month from now. The technology, the data, and the best practices are all out there, and our transition work is laser focused on bringing all of these things to Cook County. Technology is not just about better modeling, let's remember, with more data. It's also about transparency, which is so vital to making a clean break from the past. The taxpayers deserve to know how their assessments are calculated. It's not just the law, and it's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. This has been in the news recently. with the revelations about analysts selectively using Zillow in an arbitrary hand check process. As we stand here today, the assessor's office is rolling out a new assessment model in Chicago, which it says is more accurate and brings things in line with industry standards. But the problem is that it has, how it has arrived at these new assessments is still just as obscure as before. As a result, many Chicagoans are assuming the worst motives and practices, and confidence in the new system has been impaired from the outset. The assessor's office says that it will release the model, and that's very encouraging, and we encourage them to do that to raise people's confidence. We are committing ourselves to telling property owners how their assessments are calculated. No more closed-door backroom adjustments. This should be the minimum standard for this office. This is a requirement for building trust in the integrity of the system. It will take years. We'll go further by making data and algorithms, including the assessment variables, available to outside parties so that people can check our work. This is fundamental. By opening up data in this way, we can root out the biases and unsound valuation practices and favoritism that we know have existed and restore confidence in the office. Transparency is going to be an excellent disinfectant. And I have a prediction for you. When we come in, as we bring sunlight into the assessment process, it won't look pretty. There are going to be unpleasant surprises. You know, we're looking at unwinding years of corruption and malfeasance and neglect. But you know, what I'd also like to know is that transparency goes hand in hand with something else that's very important, and that's setting a new ethical tone. It signals a break from past practices, and over time helps to build trust in the system again. This will be a multi-year task. We have a slate of new ethics rules that can be implemented on day one. And here's what we have in mind. As a candidate, I've already pledged not to accept donations from the property tax appeals industry. And as assessor, I'll do the very same. I'm committed to eliminating the culture of pay to play in this office. And we're looking at a variety of other ways to break the perception that certain parties have an inside track to more favorable outcomes. Among these are creating a public visitor log, disclosure of employee contacts with parties engaged in appeals, anonymizing from analysts the identity of the law firms handling appeals, rotating analyst assignments of certain classes of properties, having 2 pairs of eyes on certain key properties, enhanced codes of conduct and limits on gift and entertaining, enhanced disclosure of conflicts of interest, and a bevy of other measures that we can do to attack the culture of pay to play. And we'd like your suggestions too. You can send them to transition@fritzforassessor.com. To truly enhance ethics, transparency, and fairness in the office, we also need better hiring. We need to eliminate nepotism and cronyism in hiring and bring in a professional and ethical workforce that reflects the diversity of Cook County. As assessor, I'm committed to swiftly implementing the hiring and performance measurement requirements of the Shackman Monitor, and eventually exceeding them. I'll make sure all employees undergo professional assessment education programs, such as that available from the Illinois Property Assessment Institute, the IPAI. And that means only highly qualified, well-trained staff will be assessing the value of taxpayers' homes. This is serious business, and we need to approach it with the same seriousness and importance that it deserves. We need to equip this office to serve all of Cook County, with all of its racial and ethnic and linguistic diversity. This means implementing a robust diversity hiring plan and fostering a culture of inclusion and respect for the people that work inside the office. This means that overhauling the way this office does community outreach is important, which is currently so focused on appeals. We should be focused on educating residents across the county on the services and exemptions and benefits that are available to everybody. My background is well suited for all of this. I've spent my whole career valuing assets and acting as a financial steward. I worked at Columbia Wenger Asset Management for 13 years as an investment analyst and a portfolio manager. And while at Wenger, I valued thousands of companies around the world, including major investments in real estate companies. My work involved investigating the tangible and intangible qualities of an asset in order to make fair, consistent valuations of them. And before Wenger, I worked at Morningstar and helped build the company's equity valuation models that they still use today. I hold the Chartered Financial Analyst designation, as well as the Certified Illinois Assessment Officer designation. I have an appreciation of the professionalism of people employed in this field and of our township assessors. I want to work with them to better serve the public, and as they're a vital part of the system in processing exemptions and the key mission of improving data accuracy. I'd like to end with a brief discussion of how Cook County will benefit from an ethical, transparent, and fair assessor's office. I hope you're with me on the obvious benefits of making assessments less regressive, less discriminatory, and more accurate. So people will need to commit fewer resources to appealing. But I think the benefits will go well beyond that. And I want to call out 3 additional benefits. 1 is an improved investment climate. 2 will be better municipal fiscal health. And 3 will be progress towards fairer, wiser taxation. First, let's talk about the investment climate. And let's go back to that Economist article that we talked about at the beginning. We were surprised when our discussion with the Economist Midwest correspondent resulted in a big story, and I'm not sure if Emily was here or not. We asked her how the story made it into the print edition of The Economist, and she said, here's what she said: "My editor loved the story because this is what readers around the world want to read about Chicago." Now, we weren't going to argue with her on that, don't get us wrong, but this is a big problem for all of us. We have to counter this narrative, which often surfaces as a leading disadvantage for Chicago when they're out there trying to induce companies to relocate here. Executives are reading this stuff and they know about it. I was at the recent Chicago Forum on Global Cities, and the topic that repeatedly surfaced was the crucial importance of building transparency to reduce the cost of doing business and to improve the local investment climate. At the assessor's office, we're taking dead aim at reversing the narrative that Economist editor was catering to. And this will have benefits that extend just beyond the feel-good factor. It's not just about Chicago's reputation, it's about dollars and cents. We spent the last few months talking to market participants big and small. This includes some of the very biggest real estate investors in the world, CEOs of banks, major commercial banks, but also small business groups and community development organizations. We hear the same tune over and over. Better transparency is better for everyone, for capital providers, for investors, for market participants. Transparency reduces uncertainty, which reduces the cost of business. If you have a transparent market, the value of assets can increase because the riskiness surrounding the cash flows from them is reduced. Those who engage in finance will get this. Don't mean to get in the weeds, but it's a big concept. If we can make this risky for everyone who's providing capital, be it investors, be it banks, that makes it easier for everyone to do their projections and they can plan around. And second, it stands to reason that if we can improve the Chicago area's reputation and investment climate, it's going to be good for building occupancy too. And this office, as it happens, has been extremely lax when it comes to giving property owners credit for vacancy. And just so you understand what that means, if a building owner says their property is vacant, they are basically getting their assessment reduced, which reduces their annual property tax bill for holding on to the property. And when this office is too lax, it gives property owners a chance to game the system. They can lower their cost of carry by keeping properties vacant or empty, while betting on the long-term appreciation of the underlying location. This hurts the tax base in multiple ways by under-assessing the vacant property, hurting the neighboring businesses because there's less foot traffic when the space is vacant. It also hurts sales tax revenues in both ways. It also happens to hurt the vitality of neighborhoods. We hear this from neighborhood chambers of commerce over and over and over again. We see this in locations as varied as Clark Street in Lincoln Park. We've been up Clark Street recently, lots of vacancy. Pretty prime location. Six Corners in Irving Park, 87th Street in Chatham, and all over in the northwest and south suburbs. Less laxity on vacancy is going to encourage utilization of these spaces, thereby expanding the property and sales tax base and municipal fiscal health. Third, making the assessor's office ethical, transparent, and fair is an essential step for making our whole system of local government finance fairer and smarter. Our plan is going to greatly reduce the regressivity of our property tax assessment system. But even if we're 100% successful with that, our system of financing local government through property taxes will remain, and it will remain highly, crushingly regressive. I see so many friends here from the south suburbs, and you know what I'm talking about. As you know, about 60% of Cook County property taxes go to our public schools, and this is largely because Illinois is dead last in the United States for state funding of local schools. Dead last. Our state has literally made it dead last in the United States for state funding of schools. It bears repeating. Other states share more revenue with local schools because they have higher, more graduated income taxes to share. So we're going to be pushing, and we intend to push for the graduated income tax as part of our effort to reduce the burden of property taxes everywhere, but especially in communities impacted by the housing crisis where effective tax rates are disastrously high. The same communities that have been damaged by years of overassessment. The voters sent a clear message in 2018. Fairness, transparency, and integrity are not too much to ask of our elected officials. Every day, working on this transition, we hear from people whose lives and communities have been impacted by this broken system. And we feel a great urgency to fix it. And I hope after the discussion today that you feel this urgency too. We can't wait any longer. In getting this right, we're going to be laying a foundation to more sensible tax policy in Illinois and with our politics. So with that, thank you, and Mary, we can go right to our discussion. The mic on? All right, my mic's on.
Am I on? Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Fritz, for opening the conversation today. As you know, ICPR is committed to transparency in improving transparency and accountability in our politics and our government. And so the urgency you spoke with and the commitment to transparency, this is something that is aligned with our mission. And so we're really happy to have you here today to really talk more about your vision moving forward. So before we really get in a little bit more to some of what you just outlined, why don't we sort of open the conversation with, why you decided to run and what influenced that decision? A little bit, you talked a little bit about your background, but let's open with that.
Sure. So, I mean, this office has really been underappreciated for the economic impact that it has throughout our county, and also the political impact that it has. And it's been creating tremendous damage. Basically, if we look at the long historical perspective, we have an office that's supposed to be fundamentally about equity and fairness, dividing up the property tax bill. But it's never really been about that. It's been more about dispensing favors. And that's at the cost of the great damage that I talked about in the speech. And as I look back and as I learn more about the office and what's been going on, and just for the record, we started running before that Tribune series came out. It's been really studied for a long time. People have known it's been regressive and problematic. I said my background is perfectly situated for the problems that this office has because I've spent a career valuing assets, using lots of data to value things, and the powers of the office require stewardship, and that's what my old job is about. And I like the idea that it's an executive office where all the levers are at our hands to try to fix it. So that's what brought me into it. Politically, I was also concerned that we're going to have a lot of generational turnover here in Cook County, and I didn't like the idea that Joe Barrios would have a hand in determining what that next generation would be like.
Thank you. You talked a little bit about the long-standing sort of impact of the property tax system, and I'm curious, sort of from your campaign, your experiences with homeowners around Cook County, what is the impact on their daily lives? What are the conversations that you've had with people around the county about how the system, the property tax system, has affected their livelihoods?
We got reinforcement every day during the campaign and since then. Like I said, people have not only their own stories about their interactions with this office, but how economically it's affected them. Many people, for a $150,000 home on the south side, the studies that were done by the Tribune showed that the overassessment can be somewhere between $500 and $1,000 per year more in property taxes paid than they should be paying. That is enough to displace lots of families. Let's think about all the people that we know. I think there have been lots of studies saying that if you had an unexpected expense of $500, how many families could not handle that? Well, that's what's happening every year with overassessment. And that causes incredible displacement. You hear from local businesses who are trying to get by, but if there's overassessment on a commercial strip, what that does is it first leads to disinvestment because stores have trouble making the numbers. A lot of retail stores at the street level are pretty low margin businesses, and if they're overassessed, just a couple of $1,000s can cause them per year can cause them to disinvest, and then that disinvestment causes the street to deteriorate. Then these businesses can close, and the other businesses that could move in don't, because again, they also have trouble hitting the numbers in their model that we consider moving in, again, because of overassessment. And it just leads to incredible damage with vacancy and hurts communities, really the people who are the backbones of communities, small businesses, people who have been there for a long time. And if you go to a church around Chicago, people who've been the backbones of their churches also feeling driven out, and it hurts everyone. It just hurts everyone. You see this everywhere. And again, we cannot fix the regressivity of property taxes in the way that we finance government. This is a state problem because we're not funding education adequately at the state level. But the regressivity of the assessment system is something that is curable and that we are focused on addressing because it causes too much damage.
Thank you. There's so much to do, as you've outlined, with both residential and commercial assessment. So can you walk us through a little bit the timeline of what your vision moving forward and how you prioritize basically these reforms?
Sure. So as I mentioned in the remarks, I think we can have the most immediate visible impact through drawing a bright line on the ethical environment that will be prevailing in the office. We can do that from day one. Transparency, we're going to open up the data as soon as it's technologically feasible to everyone so that people can see what's been happening. And like I said, I don't expect it all to be pretty. It may not be we're not in the office yet, so we don't know what the state of the data is, but we feel like every person who lives in this county deserves to know where the numbers are coming from, or if they've been determined arbitrarily, they deserve to know that too, because that's going to be that's the necessary starting point for making the change, for changing the culture, for building trust. And we also think it'll be very healthy for people working in the office to know that we just can't be getting it wrong and not be accountable for it and just tell people that, yeah, you know, it's probably wrong, we should appeal. That's not acceptable in so many different ways. We have a duty to work harder to get it right the first time. And so we want to flip around. We're going to be judging how people do in the office by how are you doing for the average person who doesn't appeal. Have you been estimating prices accurately or not? And then from there, we think transparency will have a whole bunch of other great benefits, not only in building trust, but also it will have good benefits for the investment environment, like I said. So this can come, we can start delivering transparency benefits in year one. Again, we look to other assessors' sites around the United States for how they're doing a good job on this. Again, Seattle and Kings County has a wonderful interface that can help people understand better what's going on in their block and their neighborhood. And then we like the annual reports that they have in Los Angeles and Harris County, where Houston is, and Dallas and Denver, where they put the numbers out there in terms of how they're doing so that everyone can evaluate. You know, we should be doing a sales ratio study and telling people how this office is doing so that we can be measuring ourselves, and that will get us down to the road to increasing trust. Right now in Cook County, we have a culture of this office always gets it wrong, you should appeal. And people always have a right to appeal. But if we can start building trust that we're more focused on accuracy, on eliminating favoritism and getting it right the first time, that will start to get us towards converging with the appeals rates that we have in other parts of the country. Thank you. The other really important work is modeling and data, and that is going to be a slow grind. So if we come in with a perfect residential valuation model that's not regressive and 100% accurate, it's only going to start being visible 1 year from when we come into office in 1/3 of the county. So it will take a couple of years for it to come around. The human capacity for driving the change that we want is the limiting factor. So we're going to be really focused on training the people who are in the office, on equipping them with better technology and better data to do a more accurate job. But the rewards of all this investment will be visible a couple of years out. So that's what we think about the time frame.
Yeah. In terms of educating homeowners and business owners, making this information more publicly available, what kind of a contrast is this from sort of how things have been done in the assessor's office?
Well, today, and believe me, we've invested a lot of time and effort into this. We have no idea how the assessor's office is coming up with commercial assessments. We don't. The Jason Grotto's study in the Tribune, he did an expose last December, showed that 2/3 of the commercial assessments in Cook County had not been updated over 2 different assessment cycles. That's like since 2010. That's appalling. And as we understand, the commercial assessments are not even done on the mainframe, but they're done on spreadsheets or on paper. There's not a good paper trail or an audit trail of when there are changes to assessments and what the underlying logic was. This is really important because everyone who's engaging in considering purchasing a commercial property needs to have some certainty about what the property tax line will be in their model. If they don't, it has really bad consequences, because then a bank will say, well, we're not quite sure that the property tax that's been prevailing on this property will prevail in the future, so you're going to have to pay extra escrow like maybe 3 times just for us to be safe and to get it through our credit committee and for all the buyers to do that. Well, that means that you are going to have to be paying more cash out for a given amount that you're borrowing, and you're probably going to be able to borrow less than you otherwise could if it was more transparent. So that's bad. The investor can't leverage as much capital from the debt markets. And then an investor, they really want to know what that, what after they pay down their debt, what that property tax line will be. And if they don't, well then if they're trying to sell it, a buyer won't give them credit for the property tax they're paying. So they'll pay a lower price for the property than they otherwise would. So our system, or the lack of transparency, hurts real estate values in Cook County. A lot of the world's institutional investors are beating a path to owning buildings downtown because you get 3% on a 10-year government bond. Remember when you used to get interest for having money at the bank? You don't get money you don't get interest on your money. Well, this is a problem for all the world's investors too. So they're willing to pay a lot more for buildings downtown. They're willing to, they were willing to pay 7, then 6, 5. But people still require a little bit more of a return, a little bit more of an interest rate for investing in Chicago than they should, than in comparable metro areas in the US. And that's because, in part, of the lack of transparency. So if we fix that, we can help increase the values of buildings here. Again, the transparency effort will be a multi-year effort. So this affects businesses across the county in myriad ways, not only downtown, but also in neighborhoods. Small businesses who are making these decisions. These are, go or no-go kinds of decisions. And like we said, there's also a problem with vacancy. If we're creating an incentive for vacancy by giving back treatment of vacancy, well, that's not really good for rents in the neighborhood. Rents should be lower if we weren't treating it so laxly. And then there'd be more business activity in commercial areas if there was more transparency. And then on the residential side, this is also important. I can't tell you how many times I've heard about people considering buying a condo or buying an apartment in Cook County. But anyone here, is anyone here a broker? How many times have you heard about people not buying something because they're too uncertain about what's going on with property taxes? More certainty is going to help people make better decisions. So that's why we say transparency helps everyone. It helps buyers, it helps sellers, it helps people who are trying to make transactions happen, make transactions more easily so there's not so much friction. So this really affects everyone.
Just go a little bit further in terms of how the information will be sort of disseminated to business owners and homeowners alike. On the website, uphold their community forums or kind of outreach. I think particularly we talked about at part 2, the disproportionate impact on Black and brown communities, and you mentioned it as sort of in the intro. Is there something sort of in the vision of the timeline that will give prioritize the outreach to those communities about these changes?
Yes, so all of the above. So we're going to be going out to communities, telling people what we're doing and what we will be doing, what we're working on, what our top priorities are. We will be having quarterly updates with market participants and observers on how we're doing on our plans. So they have that. We're going to have an annual report reporting on what we've done during the year, how we're doing, where we need to improve. And then on the website, this will be the key platform for releasing all the data. It will be on the equivalent of the Cook County Open Data platform. And we want to make this data available to everyone. We hope that the data will become rich enough so that application developers can use it, build it into their APIs, so that we're institutionalizing transparency and that it can't be taken away later.
Thank you, Fritz. Again, we sort of talked about the urgency of what needs to change. If we don't make these changes now, what are we looking at? And why is it so important that we really make these changes now?
Well, we sometimes people say, hey Fritz, I agree there needs to be a transition. But don't we need to like gradually bring this in so it doesn't create too much of a shock? And we flip that around. We say, well, what do you say to someone who's paying $500 or $1,000 per year more than they ought to be paying? We're going to wait years and years for that to decrease the pain elsewhere? No, the transition is necessary. We want to facilitate the transition being as painless as possible. But it's really urgent because every year that this happens, people are being displaced. This is money out of people's pockets. You know, people are being driven into bankruptcy by this. And then, again, transactions are not taking place because there's so much uncertainty. We can make everyone better off by making things more transparent so that the market can clear, people can make investments, things can be developed, and people can go about their business. Like I said, our job is to use all the data that's out there, crunch it, work in the background so that people can go about their business. Things in the state are not perfect, but our job is very clear. Call the market prices as accurately as possible, and you can measure whether we're doing that in like a couple statistical measures. And so you don't have to believe me, just look at the numbers.
Thanks. You know, you hear sort of about Chicago residents leaving the city, in Cook County, moving out of state even. Do you anticipate sort of these reforms improving that or helping retain residents and making people want to stay in Cook County, become homeowners in Cook County? And if so, then how long would it take for us to really kind of see that?
Yeah, so first of all, I think property taxes are the single biggest factor that drives people out of Cook County, perhaps out of the state. I don't know enough about the rest of the state to say that, but I know rates are pretty high throughout our state. And again, it's because if you are someone who's making $1 million per year, the tax burden on you is lower than it is in Wisconsin. And that's because the top income tax rate in Wisconsin, I think, is 8 or 9%. It's not even 5 here, it's 4.95. That difference overwhelms any difference in property taxes for someone who's making a lot of money. But for someone who's making $100,000 a year, that $10,000, $15,000 property tax bill is a killer. And so when you look at the out-migration from Illinois, it's not people out-migrating because of income taxes, it's property taxes. Because property taxes don't care whether you're employed or unemployed. They don't care whether you have kids in school or not. And it creates a burdensome presence on a lot of people, especially if you are, if you're just a couple $1,000s away from being in a really tough financial situation. So this is something that, out-migration is driven by property taxes. It will take, like I said, if we're getting assessments right, it's going to take a few years to be visible. And then maybe even a couple more years after that to change behavior in terms of out-migration and purchasing behavior. But we've got to start it now, because the time is now.